So it's not long before the new Space Marine Codex lands, and it seems that the points changes are now finally here. Let's talk about the updates in Minotaur and Field Manual version 1.4, the slightly weird way that they've handled things, and a new slightly interesting FAQ that's cropped up, showing how Games Workshop might handle those going forward. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today I thought it was worth making an update video to say that the Space Marine points changes now finally seem to be live, and Games Workshop have made another couple of changes as well to their downloads and their app. The things that have updated today are the Minotaur and Field Manual. It does just seem to be the Space Marine points changes for that one. No other major changes to any faction that I can see at first glance at least, and they do seem to mirror the leaked points that we had the last week. Also updated at the same time is the Warhammer app. Basically, points have been added and changed around when you update the app, and all the rules have been locked for the Space Marines. And there also seems to have been a new FAQ appear on the site for Codex Tyranids. Maybe not really all that interesting in the actual contents of it, but it does both show us that Games Workshop are willing to actually do FAQs in 10th edition, which they haven't so far, and it implies that each codex will be getting its own FAQ document as they roll them out as the years go on. Starting with the Space Marine points, this kind of shows us their new system of rolling out points for each of their new publications. It seems that in 10th edition 40k, each of the books are printed with a points cost in the codex that might have a chance to be the right ones, but really Games Workshop is just embracing digital points at this point. They all have a QR code linking the player to the Games Workshop Warhammer Community Downloads points page. So there's every chance that these points that are printed are just outdated at time of release, and Games Workshop do actually communicate that. It will annoy some people, I'm sure, to have outdated numbers in the book, but on the other hand, much of the community has been wanting them to go for digital points for quite a while now, just due to how bad the Codex points tended to be. With the rollout of the Codex, it looks like First Games Workshop unveiled the content of the rules on the internet via their previews. They send lots of books out to reviewers to get the rules out online, but they don't know the points cost at that point. We only find out that in the weird window between when the rules have been revealed and when their books actually go on sale in physical copies or get shipped out. Seems they do the digital updates between those two events occurring, at least for both Tyranids and Space Marines so far. I feel like the Space Marines might have been a particularly weird release date. I don't know if it might have been just due to the slightly strange delayed release pattern. I'm not 100% sure what their motivation was for the 2-week pre-order window, which is longer than normal. Last week, weirdly, they teased the points pages by releasing them to a whole bunch of reviewers early, so we basically knew what the changes were, but then didn't decide to follow up with the official release of the points changes for a further week, maybe giving people a bit of confusion there. Now, for some reason, they've decided to do the points release today, but not actually announce it anywhere that I've seen so far. There might have been somewhere minor that I've missed. It doesn't look like there's a major article on Warhammer Community or on their Facebook or Twitter sites, but they do just seem to have posted the new Space Marine points in their download section of the Warhammer Community page, alongside a new FAQ for Tyranids, and also updated the Warhammer 40k app, at least when you next update it for yourself. Not sure why they wouldn't at least do a social media post to let people know that. It definitely is going to be something that they're very interested in with their new books. For the actual changes in the Minotaur and Field Manual, they do seem to exactly mirror the previewed points cost from last week. I went through them in a video on the channel at the time. Broadly, the Space Marine Codex got a whole bunch of buffs, several really quite nice ones to already good units. Characters in particular pretty much went down across the board besides captains, though it was a bit weird that some of the buffs helped out some really quite good stuff already, when some slightly more mediocre units weren't touched. There were just the 3 nerfs to the Codex, to Aggressors, Volcanestan, and the Fire Discipline enhancement, but I think that all of those remain good units even with them. I will run through all the points updates in full in just a second, though I thought it might be worth talking about the app and the FAQ updates first. I would also underline that there's no other changes for any other factions here. Despite being the 1.4 of the manual, it really is just a Space Marine change, this one. I certainly wouldn't have expected anything different anyway, as it is just literally the change to make sure that the Space Marine rules are reflected. It's not meant to be another balance update to Warhammer 40k, just literally coming a month after the last one. As they said previously, the next balanced data slate should be expected sometime in January, where they'll make a few more tweaks to the game, and perhaps finally turn Eldari into a balanced army. I guess you never know. Otherwise, it does seem that the Warhammer app has updated. If you click update on it, then Games Workshop conveniently locks you out of all the Space Marine rules on the datasheets. So if you wanted to see the stat line and rules for the aggressors, now you can't, and that includes if you paid the premium for the Warhammer Plus subscription. This is the slightly painful transition that will happen to each army in turn as they get their codex, and then if you want to retain the access to the rules on the app, you need to dial a codex code in there, and to do that you need to purchase one of Games Workshop's physical books. At this point in time, before the vast majority of codexes have been shipped out, in theory they should go live on Saturday, I guess. Pretty much no one should have a codex code out there at the moment, though I'm sure a few might have through shipping errors and things. But basically for most people, you shouldn't be able to access the Space Marine rules once you've updated the app until you get the codex. The points changes, however, they do automatically update and you can see them for free, as it wouldn't really make sense to conceal them, as you can download the Munitorum Field Manual for free anyway. And you can still use them to make an army list in their Battleforge, either just the one army list if you're not paying the Warhammer Plus subscription, or you can make multiple if you are. Means that you can still, in theory, craft army lists with it, but maybe not make particularly informed decisions as you can't see any of the rules. Interestingly, at time of recording, you can still download Index Space Marines from Warhammer Community. Might well be worth saving a copy of that, as at least the vast majority of datasheets have remained the same. Seems likely that that will get removed at some point in the same way as Index Tyranids has, and replaced by a Codex FAQ. Speaking of which, the other minor rules update today was maybe not that interesting from the actual rules that it brought, but it does also help us know about what's going to happen with the Codex Digital Rules rollout that's going to happen as each army gets its book. So far in 10th edition, Games Workshop's perhaps been remarkably resistant to publishing any FAQs. They published the core rules, which did have a fair few bugs in them, and tried to fix them in more sort of general terms type documents with their big designers commentary, which actually makes some really big and important changes to the core rules of the game. What they haven't done is answer any basic yes or no questions as to how certain interactions work yet, and I feel like that's something that's sorely missing from the core rules at least. I believe that this one is perhaps the single first FAQ of 10th edition for the core rules of 40k. It's basically answering a yes or no question as to the Tyranid assimilation swarm. Perhaps a slightly dubious interaction where the detachment can eat a unit that just dies to heal itself a bit, and the detachment is asking whether or not the unit in question who just died can use it to heal themselves, the obvious answer being no. Seems like a bit of a silly question, very unlikely to be rules as intended, but at the same time I can see by the way that the stratagem's worded how that might allow for that, so it's probably a good loophole to patch even if it's not going to be relevant for many people playing the game. I think what would be a lot better though would be to publish some core FAQs for 10th edition in general. There's just quite a lot of things that could really benefit from some easy yes or no questions answered about them. Say for example, extra Overwatch rules on datasheets. They don't really seem to work rules as written, as almost none of them tend to override the once per turn restriction on the Overwatch stratagem itself. I think they could do with ruling one way or the other as to whether or not a command point reroll targets a unit or not, as the core text of the stratagem kind of implies that it might not do, but that's quite a big deal for whether or not you can use it for free with battle tactics. And also just a little bit of clarification around ignoring modifiers and various interactions with that would be rather nice. I feel like these are the sort of questions that would be so much easier to answer with FAQs as opposed to an enormous dense rules document trying to explain things in general terms, which is what the designer's commentary seems to be. Finally though, let's just run briefly through the Space Marine points cost changes. These are all similar to what you might have heard last week if you watched the last video, but let's jump through them at a fast pace. The jump pack intercessors are pretty awesome at just 85 points. I thought they were already fairly nice at 90 points just for a utility unit to bully enemy infantry. 85 points seems like a bit of a steal. Just surprising to see Space Marine stat lines with jump packs at that kind of cost. The company heroes remain 95 points and remain very niche at that cost. They're really quite good durability for the points, but they just don't really work very well for most captains. Could be okay for Vulcan Estarn though, who doesn't want to buff his own units. As mentioned, the Fire Discipline trait at the Gladius detachment got nerfed. That is 30 points rather than 25. That's the new version of Bolter Discipline for the sustained hits on a 5+. To my mind, the extra 5 points cost doesn't really change anything for that one at all. It's still an awesome enhancement and a massive firepower boost. Ideally best used on the Apothecary Biologist or a Lieutenant for sustained lethal hits on a 5+ in Devastator Doctrine. Combine that with Oath of Moment and you make just about any unit into a massively scary damage dealer. For the infantry squads, the other major nerf was aggressors. They went up to 110 points per unit of 3 of them, perhaps to compensate from them gaining hitting on a 3+ in combat, and maybe seeing some good play in tournaments with the Bolter Discipline combo. Means that they're feeling kind of fragile for their points cost now, I think, but still definitely immensely scary if you can deliver them to a full round of damage dealing. Inceptors went down to 110 points. They're even better than they were before. Pretty excellent nuisance units to do secondary objectives and threaten isolated enemy infantry. Outriders went down to 95. They do kind of need to be cheap when they can only really threaten infantry all that much. I feel like they're a lot less punishing to take them than they were before, but still probably a tiny bit off being good. The two flavours of Terminators went down a bit, the standard ones to 185 and the Assault Squad down to 195. The regular ones, that might just be compensating them for ignoring modifiers being lost. The Assault ones maybe narrow the gap on the regular Terminators. I feel like they're both pretty fine units, but maybe not super standouts. Scouts are amazing at 55 points, going down 10. I guess we'll look forward to Games Workshop actually releasing the kit for these at some stage. But just 55 points for 10 wounds on the board starting up the field is pretty excellent. Sternguard dropped down to 100 points. I feel like they definitely needed a points cut to compensate for the old oath going away, plus their special rule is worse. I still say that puts them in the region of being just kind of okay as opposed to massively great. Perhaps some of the more surprising changes came to the Walkers and Dreadnought. The Ballistus Dreadnought dropping down to 140 points is looking very nice now. As I did in a comparison video last week with the new points costs, it does seem like it competes very well with the Gladiator Lancer now. Not as threatening against big heavy targets for the points cost, but massively more durable with that 2+ save and cheap points tag. The Invictus looking more interesting at 140 as well. Could be fun with a Walker stratagem in Ironstorm Spearhead. The Redemptor Dreadnought got perhaps an unneeded boost, going down to 200 points, and again is just all around strong with a -1 damage and general purpose range and melee. And sadly the Brutalis and the regular Dreadnought both remained unchanged, despite probably being the least effective of the Walkers to start with. Games Workshop haven't really done themselves all that many favours here. For the Space Marine motor pool with tank speeders and flyers, the Repulsor and Repulsor Executioner both went down a bit, despite again being excellent, and more so in both the Firestorm and the Ironstorm Spearheads. The Whirlwind dropped 5, which is kind of fine. Losing Oath is maybe a big deal for that one though. The Storm Speeders all dropped down. The Thunderstrike still seems to be the best out of those ones with the +1 to wound against vehicles, and the Flyers all dropped down a bit, the Storm Raven to 240, and the Storm Hawk and Storm Talon by 10. Out of those ones, the Storm Raven is probably my favourite. It does have quite a lot of synergy with the Firestorm Spearhead, lots of nice close-range firepower with loads of Strength 5 twin-linked Hurricane Bolters, and deploying a unit from a transport at some excessive range. Otherwise, for vehicle units, the Firestrike servo turret went down 5, which is kind of fine. The Hammerfall bunker is still absolutely awful at 175, given that Games Workshop ruined its counter-fire type special rule. The Razorback and the Impulsor both dropped down 5. I feel like the Repulsor in particular is looking very good for 80 points. Genuinely quite tough and packing some alright firepower, between a missile launcher on the top hatch plus a bunch of small arms. Finally, as mentioned, characters generally went down quite a bit, almost everything dropping by around about 5 or 10 points. The captains were broadly neglected, despite their battle tactic things being nerfed. It was only the captain with the jump pack going down a bit. He's down 15 to 85 points, perhaps to try and sell copies of them alongside jump intercessors maybe. Though I feel like he perhaps was deserving of a bit of a buff, as he was a little bit overcosted before. The standard Primaris Lieutenant I think is still fun at 65 points, perhaps one of the nicest and least complicated characters to add to a unit, just adding some lethal hits and some okay melee threat. The Librarians all dropped a bit as well, including that iconic Terminator one from the recent animated trailer. 75 points for sustained hits for a Terminator block seems alright. The Chaplains all dropped with their +1 to wound, again looking very nice character buffs. So did all the Ancients, plus the Apothecary and Judiciar, and the Tet Marine going down to 55 points is perhaps the most surprising change here. I felt like at 70 points they were already one of the more efficient characters that you could lead your Space Marines with. At 55 points, they're very hard to pass up if you've got any vehicles in the army with some threat, and it's obviously beyond all to include in the Ironstorm Spearhead. Finally, for the epic heroes, most things dropped down here again. Gillimanfield doesn't really drop enough to compensate him from both having his oath and his stratagem changes nerfed, moving down into merely okay for his points cost now, given his enormous 360 point price tag. For the rest, I feel like Chief Librarian Tigurius is fairly standout. 75 points gives you a lot to the unit, both in damage, defense, and other buffs. And Ajax Agatone, now he can lead Blade Guard, went from being a niche character into a real powerhouse with that strength 10 damage 3 hammer and reroll wounds. Games Workshop did seem to see Vulcan Hestan coming as well. He went all the way up to 100 points, though given that he gives you 4 reroll wound rolls against one target for Melters or Flamers, I think he's still very justifiable in a Salamander-style army with Land Raider Redeemers and Flamestorm aggressors, particularly in that Firestorm Spearhead. Out of the changes, as with last week, I'd consider these perhaps some of the most standout winners out of the points changes within the codex. On reflection from the ones that I mentioned last week, I'd probably also give a shout out to the Ballistus Dreadnought, which, having looked at the numbers, actually genuinely seems to be one of the best Space Marine ranged anti-tank damage dealers now, and particularly in Ironstorm Spearhead where it can get some lethal hits. Otherwise, the Jump Intercessors, Scouts, Repulsor Executioner, the 200-point Redemptor, the Inceptors, the Tech Marine, and the Impulsor, I feel like all of these are definitely going to be ones to consider in top Space Marine armies. So anyway, let me know what you make of the Space Marine points changes and the way that Games Workshop has chosen to roll them out. Look forward to hearing all your thoughts down in the comments below. Feel free to subscribe to the channel if you'd like to see more updates like this whenever Games Workshop updates the game. Finally, if you have been enjoying all the videos on Auspex Tactics, I would just like to mention that the channel is supported by a Patreon page, and if you're enjoying the videos, then any support over there is enormously appreciated. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things come next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.